Good afternoon. I'm Michel Suissa, the manager of the professional division of B&H called the Studio B&H. And we have a very interesting demonstration to show you today. It is about VR, but a different kind of VR, VR in a interactive environment, not necessarily a production environment. And with my good friend here, Steve Bannerman, VP of Sales at Silverdraft, but also CEO of a post-production company called Local Hero, which is really sort of a synergy that's important to actually have for everything that relates to VR in CG and post. So without further ado, I'm actually going to let Steve introduce you to the technology we're actually going to be showing today, and then we'll interact, and I'll probably have a few questions to ask him so we can learn a little more about what the system is and what it can do for us. Steve.
Michelle, thank you very much. So I trust that I'm not the first VR-related presentation that you've had at NAB so far.
No, you're not.
No.
You're definitely not.
This
You're
is
not the
the
first,
sort of,
you're not the last.
Yeah, this is sort of the VR NAB, right? But I think I'm probably going to talk a little bit about something that most people haven't decided to talk about, and that's VR as a business. Right? A lot of people are hyping technology, which is great, but is there anybody out there that's actually making money on VR at the moment? So one of the stars of the show right now is this new system that Silverdraft just introduced at NAB. It's our Demon VR system. It's an incredibly optimized system for VR, featuring really high performance Intel processors and dual NVIDIA Titan-X graphics cards. But it's not a gaming system. It's not a sort of home-based VR system. And Silverdraft is really involved more in professional VR applications. And when you start to think about the business of VR, what are the pockets of VR beginning to start to emerge, right? And so the obvious one is gaming. That's the one that first comes to mind when everybody thinks of VR. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, we're starting to see people that are taking steps toward creating cinematic content, storytelling content using VR. And the post-production side of my life, I've already worked on 15 or 16 of those kind of projects. People are dabbling in that right now, and they're dipping their toe in, and they're trying to understand, how they can take this medium that's completely new and exploit that medium to tell a story in a way that they couldn't tell without that medium. But there's a lot that's going on in between those things, and that's kind of primarily where the business for VR today kind of lies, and that's in professional VR applications. And so those kind of applications are often overlooked, and they can range in everything from corporate training applications, government training applications, all the way up to product design and manufacturing type applications. And so sort of what I want to do is spend a little bit of time surveying the landscape of all these kind of things to try to get a window into where things are going and when they might get there. Because there's an awful lot of people that are watching that are on the production side of things or on the post-production side of things, and they're wondering, when do I jump in, right? And so let's put the game stuff aside for now, because again, I think that one's been a little bit more obvious. A lot of the people that have been buying the Oculus Rift headsets and the HTC Vive headsets have been primarily high-end gamers, and so they've got their market, and that's a cool thing. So let's focus a little bit on the cinematic stuff and the professional stuff. Let's start with cinematic, right? I mean, if you're in production or if you're in post-production right now, what does VR remind you of?
Well,
from a business?
Well, from a business, I think it reminds me of two things. One is the origination of computer graphics imagery, which was something that sort of changed the face of cinematic entertainment.
Yep.
Not only that, but it also changed the face of any other part of, I would say, the business landscape.
Yep.
There isn't one product that is not being done without some kind of computer graphics visualization. And at this point, it's not even done without some kind of sophisticated 3D printing, which is really sort of
especially
the same.
B&H, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so
you could say that.
And so what's the other one?
Well, the other one is, I think, stereoscopic 3D, I think, is sort of the other way that you could say, especially when you look at something that relates to VR and you feel, okay, that's a dual perception. You need two eyes to actually understand the parallax of viewing an environment to understand that this is how it relates to 3D space. So I think that's sort of natural connection.
It's a natural connection. So what the problem that you have there is that people naturally connect the business models of those two things too, right? And that can be a bad thing. So it's a good thing from the technology perspective, because all of the things that we learned about doing left eye, right eye in stereo are fully applicable to VR because you need those. But everybody looks at VR and says, well, wait a minute, if I jump into VR, is the market going to evaporate for me the same way stereo did, right? And so what are the differences between stereoscopic 3D and VR from a business perspective? And so that's really kind of where I want to hone in. So I mean, I think in both cases, the success of the technology is a function of the maturity of the tools, right? How mature were the tools for our ability for filmmakers to create stereoscopic content? So I would argue that by the time we hit the apex of that market, the tools were still really crude, right? And so we didn't really get a chance to provide filmmakers with incredibly intuitive, powerful, mature tools for them to create that kind of content. And so a lot of the 3D content that we saw in the theaters was bad, right? It wasn't good. The experience was actually worse watching stereo content than it was watching standard linear content, right? And so the market was trending in that direction, but it ran out of runway before the tools actually matured. And I don't know about you. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and I don't even know where a stereo screen is anywhere near my house, right? So it's pretty hard for me to find stereo movies these days. So if I'm a tools vendor, or if I'm in post-production, I'm looking at this precipice going, do I jump off of that cliff again? Am I going to make the same mistake again? And what can I see in this landscape that looks different to me than the stereo landscape did? And I think the biggest difference is that in VR, there's more than one market for the content. Right? If you were doing stereo 3D, there's only one place to put that stuff, right? It's on a screen. Whether it's a big screen or whether it's a TV screen, entertainment was the only place to put that. And if that stuff didn't sell tickets, there was no place else to go, right? But with VR, that's not the case, right? With VR, we've seen gaming, we get that one. And guess what? The headsets that you buy for gaming are the same headsets that you're going to try and view cinematic content with, right? So if you're J.J. Abrams or a filmmaker or a storyteller, and you're looking for ways to exploit the medium, you want to make sure that you've got a really good tool. You got a really good headset. Well, I think the CV1 and the HTC Vive version 1 are both great products. That helps, right? But nobody's really figured out from a storytelling perspective how to exploit the medium yet, right? How do I tell a story if the user or the viewer has random access to anything versus me telling the eyes where they're supposed to look, telling the ears what they're supposed to hear, and telling your soul how you're supposed to feel about those things, right? What's the difference in storytelling? And I think that post-production tools have to mature quite a bit before those kind of filmmakers have a naturally creative environment to make those kind of creative decisions, right? So what's going to cause that to happen is this thing in the middle, right? What I call professional VR. So the cool thing about this is that there's a ton of money today being made in the professional VR space. So what we've got here is an example running on this screen of some software from Autodesk called VRED. VRED is software that's designed for manufacturing and product design and visualization applications. So virtually every car maker in the world is now turning to VR for huge components of their product design cycle. Why? Because making clay models costs $1 million, right? And they want to save as many of those $1 million as they can. So what they do instead is they take every single element of the car, not just the exterior finish and the interior that you can see, but every single switch, every single wire, every single solenoid, all of those things, and put that data into the computer, and then they want to render it in real time. And they want to basically look at that thing from any angle. They want to walk around it. They want to sit inside the car and change the lighting and say, how does this windshield, reflect light at noon when the sun's up here versus at night when I've got headlights in my face. They want to check the fit and finish of when I close the door, what's the gap, right, between the edge of the door and the edge of the dash. I want to look inside the air conditioner vents and what do I see? How much does dust collect inside of those things? So they get to make all these creative decisions. So they buy this technology that saves them millions and millions of dollars. And so one of our systems, our Devil compact supercomputing system, was actually sitting at Tesla when they designed the Model 3. So a lot of the design of the Tesla Model 3 was done on one of our supercomputer systems. So we have scalable technology that gives people an opportunity to start with a couple of people working on one project to multiple people in multiple locations interacting with each other sort of viewing and visualizing this thing. So our CTO, Eric Smith, the Silverdraft CTO, Eric Smith, is down here with the HTC Vive right now, actually working with a real live model that we got from Autodesk from one of the car manufacturers. And the interesting thing about this is that Eric has basically just the off-the-shelf HTC hardware, right? In fact, this was the pre-release developer kit. The great thing about the Vive is that it comes with these beacons to do motion capture. You don't have to have a whole bunch of complicated stuff to connect up to the computer to do motion capture. So you just set these beacons up, you just draw a rectangle with the little controllers to tell it where your virtual area is, and boom, you get an opportunity to interact with this thing in a motion capture, fully motion capture experience. So with the two controllers, Eric has the ability to do some really interesting things with this model. So he has the ability to put a flashlight in one hand and shine that flashlight to do inspection in certain parts of the car, right? So you can highlight certain parts of the car. The other thing that Eric can do is pull up a controller that he can use to change things like the color of the car. So you can see this disc-based controller. He can put it anywhere he wants. He can move it around anywhere he wants. And just by clicking on one of the other different colors, you immediately completely change the rendering and completely change the model, right?
Do you think the real-time aspect of this application and the fact that it's so interactive, do you think that also opens sort of new horizons for a different language in the entertainment world to say, okay, VR is great, but you know what? The danger of one of VR was that it could become almost like the old 3D stereoscopic environment, which was, it's sort of a passive medium where you receive the information, you don't never interact with it. And then when I tried the system yesterday, I think that, as just as a viewer, not necessarily as an engineer or as a manufacturer or as a business person, I felt empowered to actually feel that this experience was giving me the tools for me to actually create something that would be benefiting my audience or benefiting my customers. Or how do you see the language being altered by the fact that VR has so much more potential to be an interactive medium, for business than 3D was?
Well, let's talk about that, right? So, Eric, do me a quick demonstration and show the clipping plane, if you can, with the car. So one of the interesting things that Eric can do is actually clip the car and peel it back one pixel at a time to explore cutaways of the car, right? And take so you can clip the car and then shine the flashlight on it. So this produces an incredibly interactive experience. I would argue from a design and visualization perspective, this is the equivalent of a new language, right? This is the sort of the kind of thing that you can do with this medium that you can't do without this medium, right? So how do you translate that into storytelling? That's the hard part, right? I mean, again, it's one of those kind of things where oftentimes the best ideas are the ones that seem the most obvious after the first person thought of it, but took a really long time for somebody. It's like, why didn't I think of that, right? Well, because you didn't, right? And so if you give these kind of mature tools to people, then they're the ones that go off and find creative ways to exploit those medium. And so we haven't had enough time with the tools yet for the filmmakers and storytellers to be able to figure out what that language wants to be. It's really not like stereo, where you're taking something that was inherently linear, and it's still a linear experience. Like you said, it's not interactive. It's still a linear experience. This requires a completely new language from the time that you conceptualize the story, from the time you write the script, from the time that you work with the actors. Everything is completely different. I don't know when that problem's going to get solved. Somebody walking around this show is going to solve that problem sometime. I don't know when, but that's the key. And so the important thing for those people to know is that the tools that they need are going to continue to mature, continue to get better, because there's a market for those tools in the professional space and in the gaming space, because the tools are similar, right? So if Autodesk is building tools for VR right now, they also build tools for cinematic VR. They're not going to run out of runway because they're selling a lot of this. So that's sort of one of the most important things to recognize.
I think one of the things that was really interesting in yesterday's demo was the fact that the instant gratification of sort of being able to transport yourself from one point of view to the other, where the multiplicity of point of views from being a real interactive participant to the process, or remove yourself. So you almost like you have the ability to become, to have more than one level of experience doing this. You can be the builder, you can be the designer, you can be the colorist, you can be any of these things, but you can also be the viewer with just one click of one of the devices.
Sure.
So I think that's what Eric is showing now is the transporting factor. Tell us a little bit about how you think this transporting factor is adding yet another dimension into how this can become, the next generation of interactive type of business.
That's a really good point. And again, it has an analog in the professional space and then also in the creative storytelling space, right? So it's a matter of perspective. I mean, perspective is it makes a huge difference when you're doing product design and when you're doing visualization. And so, it's like some of the smartest people in the world have a tendency of looking at things, picking them up, and automatically looking at them from the back, right? They see the side, in other words, that nobody else gets to see. And so this environment, this medium, gives you the ability to sort of do that on a moment's notice. You get the benefit of virtually any perspective. And the cool thing about this is, if you come to our booth in the South Hall, we actually have this demo running with a second user. So you can actually have two people interacting at the same time on the same model, and they see each other. And so I can see what you're pointing at, and I can see what you're pointing your flashlight at. And you don't have to be in the same room with me. You can be anywhere there's an internet connection and do this kind of thing, right? So perspective is huge when you're talking about the benefits of VR. Now, when you move into the cinematic space, perspective can actually become one of the biggest challenges, right? Because if you think about the typical post-production environment, especially when you're doing things like color correction and visual effects, you have an artist sitting next to a director, right? And the director is pointing to things on the screen and saying, I want you to fix that. I want you to change the color of that sky, or I want you to take that lamp and move it from this side of the room to the other, or maybe there's a blemish on the actor's face that you want to get rid of. It's a very collaborative, very interactive environment. What happens when one of you is wearing a headset all the time, right? How do you know what I'm looking at? How do you point to things? How do you communicate with each other? Perspective becomes a major challenge in that environment. And that's why we're starting, again, this is a function of the maturity of tools. We're starting to see that kind of challenge solved by folks like Assimilate, right, with Scratch, where they give you the ability to kind of reverse out the VR experience, and instead of wearing the headset and looking around, you've got the ability to pan the camera, right, as if you were the eyes that were looking at that, so that you have the ability then to work in a session with the director that's very, very interactive, and then only put the headset on when you're trying to do final review to see how it looks on that big screen. So perspective is huge, and just like a lot of things in the VR space, one benefit can create a significant challenge on the other side, right?
Well, I think it's what Eric's doing is really, really impressive. The immediate reaction of the system. I think I want to take a little bit about what's behind the scenes on the system that actually powers this entire sort of experience we're looking at.
That's right. Let's start double clicking on what it takes to do this. Now that we've talked about the business model,
I think that's really important.
What does it take to do this?
You can't do this on your average laptop.
Well, you don't want to do it on your average laptop. So again, let's separate the high-end gaming systems, right, and sort of put those away, because those guys have their own sort of agenda. They want to dedicate those systems to gaming. In the professional VR environment, you really want a system that's reasonable for both playback as well as development, right? So from our perspective, we want to be able to offer a system that's great for the car manufacturers to run the VRED software on, but it's also great for people that want to develop the models, people that want to develop cinematic content, people that want to develop the tools that you're using. So we want Autodesk to buy these kind of systems. So at Silverdraft, we have a very scalable product line, right? And so we approach this problem by looking at exactly what users want to do and then we design systems specifically to solve those particular needs. So if you treat this kind of as a continuum, and you say, well, okay, let's start with the creation of content, the authoring of content. So, one of the folks that's in the audience right there is Hardy Tankersley, who used to be the SVP of Innovation at Fox, 20th Century Fox. He created a really interesting piece of content around a couple of different TV shows. So one of them was around Sleepy Hollow. One of them was a VR experience around Scream Queens, which we're showing in our booth. So what Hardy needed was a desktop class, ultra workstation type system to be able to create that content, because it looked and felt a lot like a typical linear post-production process, right? You had to throw in a bit of stitching in there that you don't normally have to do, and visual effects become a challenge, adding text to things and stuff like that when you're in a VR environment. But for the most part, it looks and feels kind of the same. So the Demon VR is a perfect solution for that, because it's got the best balance of CPU performance and GPU performance. And the cool thing about the Silverdraft systems is that we take that that balanced performance, and then we understand the applications themselves, and we actually tune the system. We overclock the systems. We know how fast we can overclock those systems because we work with Intel, and we work with Micron, and we work with NVIDIA. We professionally overclock those systems, and then we tune the BIOS of the systems to the types of applications that you're running. So when an HP Z840 is not fast enough and you need something that's got better performance for the same money, then you turn to Silverdraft. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, what if you're the Ford Motor Company and you've got a car that's got 120 million polygons per second that you need to ray trace, right, in real time, and you need to be able to change the light in real time? This kind of system isn't really going to do that. This is great for rendering OpenGL graphics, but if you need to do real-time ray tracing, then you need a supercomputing system to do that, and that's where our Devil compact supercomputer comes in. So we've got two versions of that. One is CPU-based. It's a 471-core Intel processor-based supercomputer that's all sort of interconnected via InfiniBand. But at the show, we just introduced a GPU version of that. So we've got a GPU version of our Devil supercomputer that has 20 NVIDIA K80s in it. So you can imagine 4 nodes with 20 GPUs, the type of rendering that you can do with GPU-based rendering with that much scalability. So that's when you start to get the ability to take these really complex models with lots of shading, with lots of polygons, with lots of elements in them, and then render them in real time at resolutions that are 4K, frame rates that are 50 frames a second, the kind of really smooth VR experience you need when you're wearing the goggles and the headset all day. Right? If you're wearing this stuff for 2 hours, you can't have 5 frames a second jerking you around all the time. You get sick. Right.
So essentially what we're saying is that the performance of the system that we're using is really essential, not just essential, but critical to making the level of the experience. Level of experience is critical simply because you actually have to be able to make the decisions that you need to make in real time in this environment. And to make the experience, if you're a creator, and that's understandable, but on the receiving side of the entertainment, tell us why you think it's so important to have a high quality rendering in real time for any VR application. Is it because the quality of the content now is so much more important than it used to be, and it's not just the thrill of the experience itself, but that people are going to start paying attention to the quality of the graphics because we're all so much more knowledgeable, and that we all have access to some kind of technology that tells us this is good enough, this is not good enough. What's the quality towards performance ratio that you'd say is very important in the new language of VR?
So you bring up a really, really good point, right? So again, you want to be able to tailor the performance to the task, right? Whether you're authoring, whether you're doing real-time ray tracing, or whether you're consuming the sort of consumer class VR experiences. So it's all the same. When you put the headset on, you need that experience to be positive. It needs to be, you almost want the environment to melt into the background, and you really want to feel like you're immersed in that environment. So, the VR, the paradox of VR is that it's one of the only technologies that I can think of in recent years where the sort of pre-beta version of it has been exposed to so many people. The Oculus DK2 headsets were, basically touched by lots and lots of people at trade shows. They've seen that experience and they know what it feels like. So, and they liked it, right? Everybody saw what I think is really crap in a developer class tool, nothing even remotely close to what's actually shipping. But people looked at it and went, whoa, I love that. I want to have one of those, right? So that's one of the things that started to create the hype. But the other side of that coin is that we have some really, really powerful gaming experiences out there that are almost photorealistic, that are based on higher performance game engine technology. And this stuff is also basically game engine type rendering. Yeah. So we have this sort of this level that's been set for the performance and how things ought to look. And if you give us content that doesn't at least look as good as a video game, then we're going to reject it, right? And we're going to have this. We'll have that similar issue that we had with stereoscopic content, where people got sick when they put the glasses on. They didn't like the way the content looked. So you definitely need a system that's going to give you high frame rates. It's going to be able to resolve graphics in high resolution, and it's got the sort of power to drive the headsets and give you a great experience. Otherwise, you're going to reject it.
Last question is really about the present and also a little bit about the future. How do you think the technology where we have now the ability to be so highly interactive with VR content and VR content creation, where do you see the merging of, let's say, live action interaction with real-time VR creation? How do you see the two worlds merge? Because inevitably, that's going to be in our near future. Is it's either the progression of VR towards AR, where you integrate an environment to an existing space,
right,
or sort of pre-recorded images that actually dictate the environment you need to create.
Well, I think that that the key to answering that question is sort of understanding the type of environment where you want to deploy those things, right? So, and how available are the screens, the quote-unquote screens for those things? So let me give you an example. So what's the ultimate example of AR, right? What's the one everybody really wants? That's what do they say is the gold standard? I want the holodeck, right? Everybody wants the holodeck. And so what are the odds that I'm going to have the technology to create a holodeck in my home? I don't think I'm going to be able to create a holodeck experience by putting a headset on. So there's a huge opportunity there for theme park type experiences, right? And I think there's a tremendous amount of money being spent right now creating those kinds of AR experiences, and I think they're going to be incredibly powerful. When you look at the VR type experiences, you have to start to think about, well, all right, what's going to be the critical mass of screens in the near future, right? And what are those screens going to be? So even when you look at the number of Oculus CV1s that have been ordered and the number of Vives that have been ordered, it pales in comparison to the number of Google Cardboards that are out there, right? Or the Samsung Gear VR. And so if the preponderance of screens are phone-based, then you get you have some constraints around the content that you can create for it. Right, so you have one type of experience that you can deliver there, and then versus an Oculus, which gives you a much richer, much sort of more immersive type environment. So I think that until such time as the headsets sort of catch up with the amount of phone content that's out there, a lot of the people that are creating content are they want to get something out there so that when the headsets fall into your hands, you've got something to look at, right? So far, most of that kind of stuff that's been done has been done for the Gear VR and the Google Cardboard. We're just now starting to see people invest in content. Some of it's good, some of it sucks, right? But at least it's there. You've got something to look at when that headset hits you. That's the key. So it'll keep getting better. The tools will keep getting better. The technology keeps getting better and better to drive the tools, to drive the user experience. And ultimately, this technology, I believe, has far more legs than stereoscopic 3D for those reasons.
All right. So since this is an interactive presentation, and we have, I think, a few more minutes left, right? Okay. I want to invite, before you have any questions, I want to invite anybody interested in actually trying the VR experience. It's right here in front of us. Yeah, so anybody who wants to put the goggles on and try the controllers, you're welcome to do that. You have a few minutes to try it. If not, we certainly can take any questions.
And of course, again, in our booth, SL15105, the end of the South Hall, we have this demo set up there too. You can come and see it.
You had a question? Can we get the mic, please?
You
have it. Here we go.
Hi.
This is a very straightforward question. I mean, I came in the middle of the presentation, so what is your company and what part of this do you do? And if I was looking to partner with some people,
The mic.
well, I didn't want to make it too loud. I'd be interested in partnering with some people on developing for specific.
Okay, yeah. So the question was, what do we do? The mic keeps cutting in and out. I hope hope it's working on your end. So our company is called Silverdraft. Ones that make the hardware. We make the computer. I also have some experience working in post-production and actually doing post on certain about 15 or 16 VR projects. But the whole point of this presentation is that we build hardware that powers the tools, that powers the content creators, and powers the people that consume the content. So Silverdraft is our company. Our CEO is sitting right behind you. That's Amy.
All right, so for the audience here and also the viewers online, Silverdraft is a product that B&H actually carries. We have a very good relationship with Steve and Eric and the entire crew. And if you have any interest in learning about VR on the post side or anything that relates to the nature of the kind of post-production company you want to be with, the hardware that's required, feel free to reach out to us. On that note, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.